Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight we begin with the first of 3 childhood friend tales, expanded and told the way memory never dares to be, clear, cold, and honest. If you clicked for old friends returning wrong, stay close. This one starts at a swing over dark water and ends where the current always wanted it to go. Jake had sworn off Miller's Creek by the time he could drive, but the smell of it never left him. It lived in the back of his throat when it rained, a mix of wet leaves, penny metal, and the sour breath of something that didn't like the sun. He and Danny had named the swing the Ship, because if you pumped your legs hard enough, your feet touched the low branch, and it felt like you could sail right over the brown water. They were 11 the summer Danny vanished. The last thing Jake remembered clearly was the way the rope burned his palms when he slowed the swing and turned to look for a snack in his backpack. He looked down for 5 seconds. When he looked up, the seat was empty, spinning, and the creek sounded like it was trying to laugh. Years sharpened the guilt. It made Jake good at keeping his head down, good at moving away. He tried different towns, different friends, different stories about why he hated bridges. But every birthday, the same dream returned. He stood in the clearing, the swing moving on its own, and someone crouched behind the cattails as if tying a shoe that wasn't there. He never told anyone that in the dream the cattails bent inward, like fingers closing. He didn't mean to go back. That's what he told himself, driving the old road with the cracked center line, a thermos of coffee cooling at his side. He was in town to sell his parents' empty house and sign a few papers. He could have avoided the turnoff, but the sign for Miller's Creek flashed past and his hands were already moving. The gravel popped against the undercarriage like knuckles. The trees were taller than memory, cedar and poplar, making a stained glass ceiling that turned noon into late afternoon. A smell of mud and iron seeped through the vents, and something colder came with it. A thin cold that wasn't weather. The clearing was still a clearing. Bracken and ferns, a patch of bare dirt worn into a shallow dish, and the creek widening into a brown pool where the bank undercut itself. The swing hung exactly where it had always hung, rope grey and swollen, seat a weathered plank, 2 nail heads winking like dull eyes. Jake told himself he'd stand at the tree for 5 minutes, look and leave. He stepped forward and felt the ground give, just a little, as if the earth had been holding its breath and finally let it out. He touched the rope. There's a thing about old rope, it holds a memory of hands. The fibers felt familiar, but they were cold all the way through, as if they'd been soaking. His palm came away damp, though his fingertips were dry. He wiped them on his jeans and told himself it was dew. The creek spoke in slow clicks where water lipped a rusted shopping cart. Dragonflies skimmed like thrown needles. He tested the seat with his weight and then sat, the plank answering with a creak that sounded almost like a word swallowed back. He didn't push off. He just let himself sway. Behind the trees a bird made a rusty hinge sound. He smelled the old smell of wet rope and the late summer algae that always stung Danny's eyes. It came back fast, too fast. Danny daring him to jump. Jake saying no, Danny making the face he made before he did something. In that memory, there had been a faint whistling from the water, like a bottle's mouth when wind crossed it. He hadn't remembered that detail until now. The whistling grew as he thought it, a low empty note rising from the center of the pool. He turned, and the air changed. The shade deepened like a held breath. The branches stilled as if listening. Someone stood on the far bank where the old root made a grip to climb up. Bare feet black with creek muck, blue t-shirt soaked to the ribs, hair plastered to a small skull. The same sharp chin, the same chipped front tooth. Danny. But not the boy who lost his balance and went under. This one had been somewhere cold, and was still bringing its temperature with him. Jake didn't stand. He didn't call out. His throat knew better. The boy didn't wave. He tilted his head, like a dog listening for a sound that no one else hears. The skin at his calves carried a thin, green sheen, as if a thin weed had fused with him. Drops fell from his fingertips and hit the dirt without soaking, pooling in perfect coins. He lifted one hand and pointed at the water with his index finger, the way he used to point at bats under the bridge. Jake followed that finger against his will. The pool held the sky but not the trees. It held a face too, and it was not his, though it echoed him. It was Danny's face in the depth, open and waiting. The mouth made a shape Jake knew. It formed his name but didn't use air. The name came like pressure on the inside of his ears, a sound already inside him, like when you hold your breath too long and something knocks. He stood so fast the swing shot back and returned, bumping the backs of his knees. He meant to step away, but the ropes eased forward and laid themselves along his forearms. The fibers were slick as eels, then dry as cord, then tight. Not a violent tightening, an insistent one, a polite constriction that assumed obedience. He tried to twist, but the ropes remembered the shape of a knot from years ago and tied it again. They didn't bite skin, they cooled it. He said the thing he had been saving for 20 years, the apology he had polished, and it slid away from his teeth like a fish. The boy on the bank tipped his head the other direction. Jake felt a second weight at his back, small hands settling against his shoulder blades as if steadying him on a bike. The whistling note rose from the water again, and this time the trees made the answering sound with their leaves, a shiver of mimicry. There are rules to places that don't belong to you. He understood one of them right then. The creek liked the number 2, 2 ropes, 2 nail heads, 2 boys, 2 sets of footprints side by side until one stopped. Another rule arrived with the smell of pennies. The creek kept what was given, but always offered something back. It brought back shoe tongues, plastic beads, blue bottle glass, and sometimes faces. It never brought back breath. A hush fell flat over the clearing. Even the gnats drew wide to the edges. The ropes slid higher, over wrists, over the backs of his hands, around his chest in a slow hug that outlasted refusal. His toes found the bald dirt and pushed, not forward, but back. The swing obeyed the old track carved in air and memory, a curved path the creek had memorized the way bodies memorize a bruise. Behind him, the small hands pressed, very gentle, the way a friend pushes when he promises he won't let go. The seat swept forward, and the air went thinner and colder in front of his teeth. He saw himself in the water with too much detail, a grown man's face bent over an 11-year-old's fear. He also saw other things layered faint as old film, a blue t-shirt sinking, a pale wrist snagged on a root and then freed by a pull that came from the wrong direction. Something pale like the inside of a fish mouth, opening under the shelf of mud and closing again. He didn't want to see it, but he had wanted to know for 20 years, and the creek loved exact wishes. The ropes gave him 3 long swings, slow like the counting down you do before jumping into cold water. On the first, he heard a voice that sounded like wind in a soda can say that they had kept the seat open for him. On the second, the whistling split into 2 notes, and the boy on the bank raised his other hand and held up 2 fingers. On the third, the cold of the rope soaked through his sternum like ice water through paper, and the boy stepped back, satisfied, the way kids do when a game finally goes the way they imagined. He could have thrown himself sideways. He could have let his weight break the plank and collapse to dirt. That thought lit and died like a wet match. The ropes didn't fight him. They had time. That was the worst of it. The creek had all the time there ever was. An old leaf, half rotted and lace-veined, drifted past the thickest part of the current and brushed the mirrored face below. The face smiled in a way that didn't make a mouth shape, like a ripple that only goes inward. He tried to speak Danny's name, but a different name rose uninvited, one they had whispered once as a dare, a name they thought they made up the last summer to scare younger kids from the ship, the keeper under. They had joked that if you fed it enough bottle caps and bent nails, it would watch over your secrets, and if you stopped feeding it, it would ask for something that could walk to it, He had forgotten that joke until now. The water had not. The next push didn't come from behind. It came from below. The swing slowed at the top of its arc, and something under the plank lifted with a soft press like the palm of a hand from the underside of ice. The ropes tightened like seatbelts in a sudden stop. His feet left the dirt. The air cooled further. His teeth ached. His eyes watered without crying. He felt the exact weight of a boy's hand settle into his left palm, fingers small and cold, gripping for balance. The creek rose or he dipped. He couldn't tell which. The brown surface was no longer flat. It was a mouth remembering how to open. It opened where the root made a dark pocket under the bank, and something pale edged forward like a throat stepping into light. It didn't look like a monster. It looked like a shape water makes when it remembers the last thing it held. It had no face, but it had attention. It had patience shaped into a thing. Jake saw how it would go, the ropes answering that patience with their own. The swing's path narrowing, the plank sinking inch by inch until a man who had kept his head down for 2 decades finally bowed it in the right place. He saw the little exchange that would complete the rule. The creek would return the boy the world remembered and keep the man the creek had known all along, a trade in even numbers. The boy on the far bank smiled the way you smile when you finally get picked up from a long wait. He didn't look cruel. He looked relieved. He wasn't dripping anymore. The mud at his feet had stopped taking his weight. It seemed to hold him up. The whistling note softened into the simple hush of breath through teeth. If there had been words, they would have been thanks. There were no words. Only the knowledge of a promise kept late. They found the clearing the next morning because a hiker's dog refused the path and whined until its owner followed. The swing spun slowly as if cooling after a long run. The ropes hung smooth, no scuffs, no broken fibers. The ground showed 2 sets of prints, one big, one small, side by side to the water's lip, and then no more. On a flat rock by the tree, a rusty bottle cap and a bent nail sat like coins on a gravestone. The creek made its simple creak sound, and if you listened too long you could swear it split into 2 notes as steady and patient as something counting. People said wind. People always said wind. A few old-timers shook their heads and said that the ship had always needed 2. They didn't say the name kids used in the late 90s. Names like that don't get said out loud much. But sometimes, on the hottest part of a dry summer, the water at Miller's Creek looks wet in a way that is more than wet. It looks attentive. It looks like it is remembering you before you arrive. If you go, never bring even numbers, and never ever sit if the ropes feel cold all the way through. The creek gives back what you ask for, just not in the way you think. 2 ropes, 2 boys, 1 debt paid late. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. If you're ready for story 2, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter from the Black Hour Stories. Our second story title is The Basement Game. Clara had forgotten a lot about her childhood home, but the basement came back too easily. It always smelled like rain before a storm, metal, dirt, and something old that had no name. She and her 2 friends, Tess and Mark, spent half their summer down there making up games their parents wouldn't have allowed if they'd known. The best one, the one that made them legends for a few months in their little neighborhood, was the basement game. The rules were simple. Turn off every light, spin around 3 times, and whisper the name of whoever you wanted to summon. It started as a dare after a sleepover movie about seances. The first few rounds were harmless. They called for cartoon characters, old pets or dead presidents, giggling at every flicker of a shadow. But then Tess got bored and said, "Let's make one up. One that actually lives here." Mark laughed. Clara didn't. They wrote the name together with a red crayon on the inside of an old cardboard box they used as a fort. Tess thought for a second, then scrawled, "The Friend Below." It sounded dumb when she said it, but the name stuck. They decided he was a friendly spirit that only appeared to kids who could stay in the dark long enough to hear him. "If you open your eyes too soon, he'll know you're scared," Tess said. They chanted it one night, 3 kids in total blackness whispering that name between nervous giggles. "Friend below. Friend below." The words faded into the sound of the house breathing, the hum of the furnace, the creak of the stairs. Then something tapped once beneath the floorboards. Clara had felt it through her knees, light at first, then again, sharper. They screamed, turned on the lights, and found nothing. The furnace wasn't running. The basement floor was cold enough to sting. A week later, Mark fell through one of the basement steps. His shin split open, and he swore something had grabbed his ankle first. His parents banned him from coming back. Tess still visited, but she acted strange, quiet, restless, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Then came Clara's 10th birthday. She woke that morning to see her bedroom window fogged from the inside, a single word traced in it. Play? Her parents thought she did it herself. She tried to believe that too, until she noticed the mark at the base of her bed, a smudge that looked like a handprint made of dirt. That was the last night she slept in that room. Within a month, her family moved. Her dad called it a fresh start. Clara didn't argue. 15 years later, Clara was living alone in a small apartment over a laundromat. She worked nights at a pharmacy, kept the lights bright, and stayed far away from basements. It worked mostly, until one evening she saw Tess again. It was in the grocery store near the frozen foods. Tess looked thinner, her hair too long, her eyes always darting behind Clara's shoulder. They hugged out of habit, awkwardly. Clara tried to laugh about their old games, but Tess didn't smile. "You still hear it, don't you?" she whispered. Clara blinked. "Hear what?" "The tapping." Tess's voice shook. "Under the floor. You moved, but he didn't." Then Tess walked away, leaving her cart behind. That night Clara dreamed of the old basement again. The air felt damp. The concrete sweated like skin. Something whispered her name from below the stairs. She woke up, gasping, her hand still reaching for the pull chain of a light that wasn't there. Her apartment's clock blinked 3:03 a.m. She couldn't fall back asleep. The floor creaked once, near the hallway closet. Then again, closer. She grabbed her phone and called Tess's number. No answer. She left the light on until sunrise. The next morning, her manager pulled her aside before her shift. "Hey, you knew that girl, right? Tess Reynolds. They said she—" He trailed off, looking unsure. "They found her in her basement. She was digging, for hours, they think, right through the concrete." Clara's stomach turned cold. The article came out that afternoon. Tess's neighbors had called the police after hearing banging all night. When they broke down the basement door, they found her kneeling in front of a hole big enough for her to crawl through, fingernails gone, hands raw. The report mentioned a single phrase she'd scrawled on the wall beside her. "He's still waiting." Clara threw up in the pharmacy's restroom. She told herself it wasn't true, that Tess had just snapped. But when she came home that evening, her hallway light flickered 3 times, the way it always used to when they started the game. She unplugged the lamp. It kept flickering. Then came the knock, 3 taps, faint, from under her floor. Clara moved within a week. A new building, top floor, no basement this time. She told no one about the knock, not even her mother. She bought new shoes, new furniture, a new life. It worked again, for a while. Until one night the bulb above her bathroom mirror flickered, and she saw something in the reflection behind her. A shape bending forward, as if leaning out from the wall. Just dark enough to be mistaken for a shadow, just long enough for her breath to stall. The next morning she found the red crayon. It was lying neatly on her nightstand, its paper torn halfway down, like a peeled apple skin. She hadn't seen one since she was 10. She couldn't bring herself to throw it out. Instead, she locked it in a drawer. For 3 nights everything was quiet. Then she started hearing humming. Not a song, just a single, drawn-out note, like a child trying to tune a whistle. It came from the floor. She laid on her stomach one night, pressed her ear against the hardwood, and heard faint scratching. Soft, quick, patient, like little fingers moving through dust. The next day she called her building's maintenance office. The man came up, knocked on the floor, laughed and said, "You've probably got mice." He left a trap. That night, the trap went off, but when Clara checked, there was no mouse, just a folded piece of lined paper. Inside, written in a shaky red crayon, were 3 words, "Your turn, Clara." She burned the paper in the sink and left the tap running until the smoke turned to steam. She started sleeping on the couch after that, afraid of what might wait beneath her bed. Every night the tapping moved, not louder, closer, always 3 knocks, sometimes a pause, then 3 again. One night, the power went out across the building. She lit a candle and sat on the floor, staring at the dark under the couch. The wax smell mixed with something earthy, like old dirt. Then came a whisper from below her. "Ready or not?" She jumped to her feet, candle shaking. The whisper came again, stretched and distorted, like it had traveled through miles of soil. "Here I come." Her phone buzzed suddenly. Tess's name appeared on the screen, the contact she'd deleted months ago. Clara froze, hand trembling as she swiped to answer. A child's voice came through, flat, curious. "You stopped playing?" Then silence. The call ended itself. Clara stared at the floor until morning light pushed through the blinds. For once she didn't hear anything. She thought maybe it was finally over. She went to the drawer, took out the red crayon, and snapped it in half. That night, the tapping stopped, but the next morning she found a new message on her bathroom mirror, traced into the fog from her shower. "You broke me. Now I'll fix you." No one saw Clara after that. Her landlord entered the apartment 2 weeks later, when neighbors complained about water leaking through the ceiling. They found the bathtub full of muddy water and handprints smeared across the tiles. The floorboards near the couch had been pried up from below. Underneath, in the crawl space, police found a small cardboard box. Inside, written in red crayon, were 3 names, Clara, Tess, and Mark, and beneath them, one final word, friend. No one could trace the number that called her phone that last night. It wasn't in service. Sometimes tenants say they still hear tapping in the pipes, 3 knocks at a time, when the lights go out during storms. Some childhood games never end. They just wait for someone new to take their turn. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and if you ever hear 3 knocks under your floor, don't answer. Like and subscribe for the final story from the Black Hour Stories. Our third story is The Empty Desk. Ryan remembered almost every detail from his 3rd grade classroom: the smell of chalk dust, the hum of the radiator, the way the sun fell through those narrow windows around noon. He remembered the posters, the seating chart, the 23 faces of his classmates. What he couldn't remember, no matter how hard he tried, was the name of the boy who used to sit behind him. That missing name had started haunting him in his late 20s. He could picture the boy perfectly. Dark hair that curled behind his ears, green shoelaces that never stayed tied, a shy smile that came and went too fast. But when Ryan tried to say his name, his mind froze like a skipped record. He brought it up once over beers with an old classmate. She laughed, shaking her head. "We only had 23 kids in that class, Ryan, not 24. Ryan didn't argue, but deep down he knew she was wrong. He could see that 4th desk. Empty now, sure. But back then, someone had filled it. Someone quiet. Someone who drew trees during math. He could still see the pencil moving across the page, making small, slow circles for the leaves. That image followed him through high school, college, adulthood, like a fragment of a dream he couldn't wake from. When the district offered him a job teaching third grade at his old elementary school, he took it without hesitation. Maybe he wanted closure. Maybe he thought being back in that room would shake something loose. The school hadn't changed much. The paint was new, but the air still carried that dry, powdery scent of erased chalk and mop water. His first day as a teacher was strange, standing in front of the same green board where he used to copy spelling words. He walked between the rows of desks, tapping the tops with his hand, feeling the small dents where generations of pencils had pressed too hard. And then he found it. The desk by the far window. The one that had always seemed to sit slightly crooked. The chair beside it was missing, and on the desktop a faint mark. 3 letters carved so shallow they almost disappeared under the polish. L-E. The last letter was gone. Scraped off maybe, or never finished. He brushed dust away and felt a shiver crawl up his arm, something electric and old. He looked for the name in old class lists, report cards, photos. None showed a student with a name starting with L-E. In the class photo from that year, there were only 23 faces. He stared at the back row, the small gap between 2 kids where the missing boy should have stood. The space felt deliberate. That night, while organizing papers at his desk, Ryan noticed the sound of pencil on paper. Soft, steady. Someone was drawing. He turned, expecting to see one of his students who had stayed behind, but the room was empty. The noise came again from the far corner, from that desk. A single sheet of notebook paper lay there. He watched as a line appeared, slow, shaking, pressing hard enough to groove the surface. Another line followed. Then small shapes, branches, leaves, and at the bottom a crude outline of a man hanging from a tree. Ryan backed away. His breath fogged in the still air. The radiator had gone silent. On the paper, below the drawing, new words scratched themselves into the page. "You forgot me." The next morning, the paper was gone. Maybe the janitor threw it out, Ryan told himself. He stayed busy that day, grading, teaching, smiling, but at the edge of every thought came the same question. What was his name? That night he stayed late again. He brought a flashlight as if expecting a power outage. Around 9, the lights flickered once, then steadied. The flashlight rolled off the desk by the window and clattered to the floor. When he bent to pick it up, he saw small footprints in the chalk dust, child-sized, bare, leading from the classroom door to the empty desk. He followed them, his pulse pounding in his throat. As he stepped closer, his own reflection blinked at him from the window, except it wasn't quite him. The reflection moved half a second slower, and behind it, in the glass, stood the outline of a boy. Ryan spun around, but the classroom was empty. The door creaked softly open, then shut again, though no one entered. He walked to the desk, his hand trembling as he lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of papers folded tight, old and yellow. He opened one. Each had the same drawing, a tree, always the same shape, always the same boy hanging from its branches. Some were smudged with what looked like wet fingerprints. Others had tiny writing at the bottom. "I'm still here." The next day, Ryan found a note slipped under his classroom door. No handwriting, just blocky letters pressed into the paper as if drawn with the edge of a coin. "It's almost time for recess." He didn't understand it at first. Then he remembered how back then the missing boy never went outside. Every recess he stayed inside and drew trees at his desk while everyone else played. When the bell rang, he'd stay another minute, staring at the window before packing up. That memory brought another, one he hadn't thought of since childhood. The last day the boy had been there, rain tapping the windows, the teacher sending everyone to the library because a pipe had burst near the basement. When they came back, his desk was empty. No coat, no bag, no shoes, just a small puddle by the window. Ryan told the principal, who brushed it off. Probably just old pipes again. That classroom's always been damp. But the next night, when he turned off the lights, the same tapping started. Not rain this time, knuckles on glass. 3 slow taps. Pause. Then 3 more. He approached the window. The reflection moved on its own, a shadow boy behind him. Then, in the fog, his breath left. Letters formed backward on the glass. "Let me in." He stepped back fast, knocking over a chair. When he looked again, the words were gone. Ryan stopped going home at normal hours. He told himself he needed to catch up on work, but really he couldn't stand being alone in the dark at home. The school at least gave him walls he could patrol. One night he fell asleep at his desk. He dreamed of standing at the front of the classroom while his students stared blank-faced. Every desk was filled except one, the one by the window. In that empty seat sat a shadow, blacker than the rest of the room, watching him. When he woke, the room was ice cold. The papers on his desk had been rearranged. The top one now bore a new drawing, a schoolroom identical to his, with him sitting in the empty desk. That was when he decided to quit. He never made it to his last day. When the janitor opened the classroom that morning, every desk was perfectly aligned except one, pulled slightly away from the row. On it sat a new piece of paper, damp around the edges. It showed 24 students lined up for a class photo. The 24th figure was standing in the very back, hand on Ryan's shoulder. The drawing's eyes had been filled in with dark pencil circles, so deep they almost tore through the page. Ryan's car was still in the lot, keys on the front seat. His phone lay on his desk, screen cracked. The only thing missing was his teacher's ID badge. When police searched the school, they found it later that night. It was lying on the windowsill beside that same desk, partly covered by a film of condensation. Next to it was a small, child-sized handprint, pressed into the frost from the inside. Teachers who use that classroom now say the radiator runs cold no matter how high they turn the heat. Kids sitting near the window complain that someone whispers during reading time, tracing shapes on their desks with invisible fingers. One substitute told the janitor she'd seen a boy sitting in that corner after dismissal, dark hair, green shoelaces untied, watching her erase the board. When she looked away and turned back, the seat was empty. The janitor shrugged when asked about it. "That room's been off for years," he said. "Doesn't surprise me." But when he mopped the floors at night, he always left that desk for last. He said it seemed to move an inch closer to the window every time he looked away. Some friends fade from memory. Others stay just long enough to be remembered again. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and if someone you forgot ever calls your name from behind, don't turn around. Like and subscribe for more haunted stories from the Black Hour Stories.